Well, hello and good morning, or actually, it's afternoon now. Welcome to our lunchtime plenary on building power and connecting the Black church to the environmental justice movement. I am Robin Lewis. I'm the director for climate equity for Interfaith Power and Light, DC, Maryland, and Northern Virginia, better known as DMV. And I'm also the facilitator for Green the Church DMV. So I am so grateful to be on this call with the powerhouses of folks that I have here. We're excited today. We will be discussing how all of these folks that are on here are engaging congregations on environmental sustainability and advocacy for the environmental justice and equity within the communities that they serve. Many congregations, as some of you may know, are going solar, greening their church, creating community gardens, advocating for environmental policy, creating environmental justice, green ministries, and leading their communities to advocate for healthy and sustainable environmental policies and solutions. So, we as faith leaders have an added responsibility to care for creation by ensuring that we educate our congregations as well as community members on these environmental issues that are impacting their health and wellness. As you all know, climate change has impacted everything from severe storms, floods, droughts, extreme heat, inadequate food supplies, and the list goes on. Unfortunately, it is our communities, those Black, brown, and low income, that are first impacted and last, if at all, to recover. When it comes to environmental policies and financial resources that are now available to help mitigate as well as adapt to these climate catastrophes, the faith community needs to lead the charge. So I thank you all for coming today and listening to our panelists. Let's get started. Let me introduce briefly each of the panelists. We have Reverend Dr. Mark Whitlock Jr., who is the senior pastor of Reed Temple AME Church in Prince George's County. We have Brittany Drakeford, the capital market and co-chair of the trustee board at Gethsemane UMC, United Methodist Church, Prince George's County. And we have Reverend Dr. Michelle Lewis, who is the executive director of the Peace Garden Project in North Carolina. So I want to thank you all. You're just awesome. I want to thank you all. And we're going to start with hearing from Reverend Dr. Mark Whitlock. And let me just give you a little bit backdrop, and then he's going to fill in. I met Reverend Dr. Mark Whitlock last year at this same symposium. And we connected and we started working together right then with his church, which is Reed Temple AME. It is in Prince George's County. Prior to the historic appointment in July 2019, Reverend Whitlock served as pastor of Christ Our Redeemer AME Church in Irvine, California. Right? And so he's a Californian. And over the past years that he's been here, and years before, Pastor Whitlock raised more than $1.2 billion for the kingdom of God through individual donors as well as corporate, federal, and other institutional grants. So he's very used to partnering with others in the community. So I'm so excited to introduce you, Reverend Dr. I call him Pastor Whitlock, but I'm so excited to introduce you. Please share a little bit about yourself and about what Reed is doing and what the AME Church is doing.
And my wife of 39 years, she calls me Mark. So whatever you want to call me is fine. Please know that I'm honored, Robin, to have this opportunity to share again with you serving as the convener and the host. Thank you, Sister Brittany and Reverend Dr. Michelle Lewis. I look forward to hearing more from you than hopefully presenting here today. So it's going to be a short amount of time. I've been involved with environmental justice over the last really 25 years. And I'm excited about what we're doing here today. We do know, and I serve as Director of Environmental Justice for what we call the Second District of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, which encompasses 4 states and some 480 churches. We know that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King planned the 1968 Black Sanitation Workers March, where they would hold signs, I am a man, and you remember how poorly African Americans were treated at that particular time, picking up garbage. And they were like in shallow pans where the garbage would really fall over their bodies and they would have to smell like refuge for the rest of the day. They didn't even feel comfortable taking a bus to a home because of not only the stench, but also the challenge of not being paid. They were the sanitation workers were the lowest paid employees in the government at that particular time. And it was at Claiborne, it was at Claiborne Temple AME Church, which hosted the march that we're so familiar with in Memphis, Tennessee. And many of those same marchers went on to Washington, D.C. for the March on Washington. 3 out of 5 Latino and Black Americans live near a toxic waste site. Direct relationship between race and toxic sites are real and has been dealing with for a long time. In 1991, Environmental Justice Platform adopted the first People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit. So let me talk a little bit about what the AME Church is doing today. We really look at taking our 480 plus churches and offer 4 pillars. 1, sustaining the quality of God's water, accessibility of clean water, quality and conservation of clean water sources. Pillar 2, keeping God's environment safe and clean, how to address pollution concerns, electric vehicles, and engage in recycling. Pillar 3, protecting God's land and air, educating every generation on EJ and informing the church and communities about issues such as deforestation, brownfields, water conservation, and climate change. And then finally, the 4th pillar, inspiring intergenerational justice action at every level, making sure that the church engages with Robin as we green the church to make sure that our elected officials, local, state, and national, make sure that we're at the table making and giving our voice, speaking truth to power, because we know that the Bible says the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. A cattle on 1,000 hills of mine, saith the Lord. So not only is it our responsibility to make sure your soul goes to heaven, but we make sure that the body is safe and we're dealing with a clean environment and environmental justice here on earth. So not only do we get involved with, and I'm going to talk about a couple of programs with the AME churches and certainly one after, water conservation, where we were able to save 1.5 billion square acres of water for those who were using these large toilets, and we exchanged them for low flush toilets. And we were able to take care of thousands of homes with that. Oil recycling, instead of pouring the oil down the drain or pouring the oil down the sewage, we were able to make sure that we provided containers so that we could recycle that oil correctly. Energy conservation, the CARE program, which most of us are aware of, we were able to, believe it or not, help through 250,000 African Americans to really participate in not only reducing their cost in the CARE program for energy, but also how to better educate and handle the resources of electricity and others in our community. Here in Maryland, we've been really successful in working with Robin with the air monitoring devices put on churches. And 78% of our churches now in the program have these air monitoring devices to see what the quality of air is in the communities where we live, work, and worship. We've been able to plant over 100 trees. And then finally, a solar project that we're working on. And we're excited about the solar project. Why? Because we believe the solar project not only will reduce the consumption, but it would also provide revenue to the church. I'm done, but I'm never finished. Please know that we have a multiplicity of programs and opportunities for the church, not only to raise money. That's not the real issue. The real issue is to save the earth, and the church must be about that. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you so much. I'm glad you mentioned the toilet project, because that was interesting. And maybe you could share a little more about it and how you had to rename it.
Yeah, it was interesting when we were approached by the water agencies. we went back to our churches, and it was a toilet program at that time, and you would exchange a 10-gallon or even larger gallons that you would flush for solid waste, and certainly other waste in the toilet. Comb your hair, drop it into the toilet, and you would flush, wasting water. And so when we came back to our board, and we, who had hosted every president and several other people, they did not feel comfortable talking about toilets over the pulpit of the churches. And we said, well, okay, what if we change the program name to water conservation? A water conservation okay, Reverend, you can do that. And we did it, and we were able to exchange thousands, I mean thousands, of these water conservation devices in homes and apartments. So much so, and I saw you, Brittany, when you looked at the amount of money raised. I didn't get it. It was for the community. I saw your eyes. Amen. And when we raised $3.5 million, saved 1.5 billion square acres of water in the city of Los Angeles, the same people who were complaining about the toilet program, when I said the water, she said, no, Reverend, that's a good toilet program. That's a good toilet program. But anyway, I think it's this educating the churches. And we get so caught up in the social theological or the social ramifications of environmental justice that we forget what the purpose is. And until we begin to speak in a language that we all are agree upon, then we will find ourselves dealing with these roadblocks, which are unnecessary. What's the difference if it's a toilet program or a water conservation program? It's to save the earth. It's to save the water. We don't want the same challenges that we had in Detroit. We don't want the same challenge we had in Michigan, throughout the country. We got to work on making sure that it's palatable, but it also that it must be progressive for the community. I'm sorry. I know you asked me to give you 2 minutes, but I gave you 5.
No, I love it. I love it. That is my favorite story. That's my favorite Pastor Whitlock story. Sometimes we have to say it different depending on the audience, and it's fine. The point is to get the job done.
I forgot one more thing. We employed men who called themselves Crips and Bloods. We employed about 50 men who called themselves Crips and Bloods and Cholos. And then once they got a job with us, they were water conservation experts. They were employment people. They worked in the warehouse. They became plumbers. And so from that point on, they were never known as Crips and Bloods. They were gainfully employed by our toilet program.
That's an excellent story. Thank you so much, Reverend Whitlock. Now I'm going to jump to you, Brittany. Sister Brittany, my sister. Brittany, I'm going to read a little bit. You sent me a little bit about you that I would love to read. Brittany is a believer in faith, the practice of combining faith, arts, and technology to energize communities to create equitable places for generations today and tomorrow. She is a current PhD candidate in urban and regional planning and design at the University of Maryland, College Park, and North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University. Her research and practice centers on the legacy of post-Reconstruction African American communities, the ways in which the built environment and public infrastructure hold the memories of discrimination, and how the intangible cultural heritage for the marginalized can be leveraged to establish shared leadership and collective action. I'm going to leave the rest to you, because even though it's a short bio, it's a long bio. So I'm going to leave the rest to you. So Brittany, thank you for coming.
And thank you so much. And I'm really excited. So my family my father is a member of Reed Temple. So I'm very familiar with the work that you all are doing out there, Reverend Dr. Whitlock, and very excited about it. Also excited to learn more about the programming that you're doing, Reverend Dr. Lewis. And also you, Robin, as well. So I'm just really excited to be here. And really, I'm going to share a few slides. Just want to make sure. Thank you. Just to talk a little bit about the work that we do and the perspective that I take. I'm really trying to combine coming from a lady perspective, so a lay person, and also coming from a professional practicing urban planner and also somebody who researches urban planning, and having like a love for my community and using that, and that being this opportunity as to how I've been working with my church in Capitol Heights, Maryland, to start thinking about environmental justice, justice in general, environmental justice, sustainability, and what we can do, and how that has impact on our local community in Capitol Heights. And so this is like my home church. Actually, this is a church that I've attended since I was a baby. This is the same congregation that my great grandfather was a part of, Robert Herrod Sr., who was the descendant of enslaved people in Prince George's County. So this is the same congregation that I have been a part of for generations. And so as I travel, and I would travel back from church to home, home to church, these are the types of things that I would see. So vacant storefronts, a bunch of liquor stores or corner stores, right? Pedestrian fatalities or pedestrian spaces that were difficult to navigate and access. And as a child, I couldn't necessarily make sense of it. And so I always had these questions. And as an adult, these are the same questions that I try to answer now through my academic research, and even things that I try to address as an urban planner. And so when I look at the broader community of Capitol Heights, these are some of the things that we see in the greater Capitol Heights community. So we see disparate health outcomes. So we have some of the highest rates of chronic illnesses, the least amount of medical care providers, and we also have issues around accessing affordable housing, accessing healthy food, accessing all other kinds of amenities and resources that make healthy, vibrant communities. We also see high rates of flooding in this neighborhood as well. But interestingly, right, we see like high rates of residents who are involved and engaged. We have a voting rate that's higher than the national average. We have lots of civic institutions. And so there's always this driving question: how does a community that has such high rates of, or higher rates of local engagement, still have certain types of environmental or health concerns? And so from an academic perspective, I look at this framework of the legacy of residential segregation, the legacy of systemic racism, and how that has actually physically designed our neighborhoods and physically designed our communities to not just separate people from one another from a housing perspective, but is also separating people from opportunity. And when people are separated from opportunity, we see a separation from life. So in Prince George's County, there's a 16-year life expectancy difference from individuals who live in some more progressive or more wealthier neighborhoods like the city of Greenbelt that are amenity rich. They have access to parks, have access to grocery stores, have access to public transportation and all these other types of resources, versus individuals who live in communities like Capitol Heights or like Suitland. So 16 years difference. And what I like to think about is, what does 16 years mean, right? 16 years is a long time. It's almost a generation. So what happens when you have a community that loses a generation of institutional knowledge, a generation of family traditions, a generation of all other kinds of things that is basically decimated and extracted from the community? And so what we try to do, or what I try to do, both through my work at the Capital Market and then also through the work with the church, is to think about community design through this lens from a political perspective, but then incorporating a spiritual perspective as a way to translate and navigate between multiple worlds. And so we basically understand community design, or how communities are designed today, as an issue of values and power. So there's some people who hold value. There's some people who have values and beliefs about a place, and those people have power and they make decisions based off of that power. Then communities, based off of those decisions they make, they shape community conditions. So they shape where roadways are located. They shape how stormwater is addressed. They might shape where grocery stores or sidewalks or all these other types of important things are located in our community. And from there, and those decisions that they make, our communities then experience certain things like high rates of chronic illnesses, higher rates of urban flooding, or other types of conditions. And so this is how we understand that. And then our model that we use at the Capitol connecting that with the work that we do at Gethsemane, is to think about what would happen if we organize neighbors to reclaim their own health in their neighborhoods. And for us, this is something that is basically we've seen across like the faith tradition, and it's something that we've seen in our local community, right? So we can talk about Richard Allen with the AME Church, Fannie Lou Hamer and her work in organizing farmers in Mississippi, of course, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And then for our local legend, somebody who attended our church was Mildred Ridgely Gray, who was really one of the catalysts for the local historic preservation movement in Prince George's County and fought against the State Highway Administration, Maryland State Highway Administration, and also Prince George's County when they wanted to move the historic Ridgely Church when they were widening Central Avenue, which is, of course, is this incident of environmental injustice that our community experiences. So we look towards them as examples of models of how we can build this beloved community and what that beloved community should look like. And so why I find it important or helpful to organize with faith-based institutions in thinking about the work that we do with the capital market and also just as an urban planner is that in Prince George's County, about 1 in 2 individuals are a part of some type of faith community. So that means if I'm trying to just make the easiest way possible for me to connect with any people or for as many people as possible would be to connect and to engage with a faith-based institution, right? The other thing that we saw at Gethsemane when we started to map where our residents or where our parishioners are at Gethsemane, and this is a map that describes that. So every green dot on this map is where a parishioner lives. So if you see a dot, that's a parishioner's household. If you see, I don't know if you can see the red church that's in the middle, that red church shows where the actual Gethsemane United Methodist Church is located. So based off this map, we see that our church is not just a physical building, but is basically a space where community members who live in that immediate area are coming to. So for us, organizing with a faith-based institution means that we're able to connect with a group of people who are already readily committed to that particular neighborhood and that particular location. And so what we've done with our residents, through partnering both with the capital market and partnering with Gethsemane, we've been able to build out political advocacy trainings and political discipleships for our church members, as well as do some other types of programs. And I'll show some images later that really highlight that work. So one of the first encounters that we did as a church was our Clean Up to Green Up program. Our church, Gethsemane United Methodist Church, has 17 acres of land. Having 17 acres of land in the middle of Capitol Heights along the Blue Line corridor is a very rare thing. And so we have Cabin Branch Creek. So we have some important stream valleys and some important waterways that are connected with our church. So we also want to make sure that we're protecting those. So we started with an encounter where we had about 100 people come out to help us plant trees on the site. All right. And that for us was one of our first encounters of helping residents and helping our parishioners start to get a little bit more acclimated to the process of environmental justice and environmental sustainability and our role in it. From there, we launched a political discipleship class. And our political discipleship class was an 11-week class where we actually learned about how we can use our faith as a tool to advocate for important political issues in our community. And one of the things that we had to do as a part of our political discipleship course was start to drill into one cause. And what we determined was that for African Americans and people living in communities that are historically under-resourced and historically undervalued, we can't just distill the causes down just to one cause. The environmental justice, food access, housing, these are all interrelated and interconnected issues. And so we ended up developing a mission statement that focused on both food justice, housing, transportation, prison reform, interpartner and community violence, and using that as a lens for how we will work with our community, particularly in Capitol Heights. So from that, our first focus for using that as a framework was the capital market, or is the capital market. The capital market is a community-based initiative that started in Capitol Heights when the local grocery store left out of the neighborhood. So every week we provide a farmers market in the community, partnering with African-American farmers and other farmers of color to provide healthy, fresh, affordable food options to our neighbors. And then we also help to support advocacy and education around cultural heritage and food systems in Prince George's County. So what that looks like is that we support local farmers. You can see some images of that on the previous slide. We support local businesses. We do healthy food community asset walks where we do community asset mapping. We do gardening educations, and we also do a variety of healthy food demonstrations to really to take this farmers market and not just have it as a place where people can buy food, but really create it as a community space where people can interact and learn and talk about some of these environmental justice issues. The most recent project that we're currently working on, I led the church in doing a community and a church-wide master plan. So I mentioned we had 17 acres of land. And I said, well, what are we going to do with this 17 acres of land? We have to do something with it, right? Like we want to do something with it, both to benefit the community, but also to benefit the environment and to support the church and seeing the church in the future. So that was a partnership with the Neighborhood Design Center. So we did about 18 months of community outreach and engagement. We had community members think about what the church would look like in the future, what types of resources and assets would be important to have in the local community. So that included everything from food hubs to community gardens, the farmers market, spaces for young people, housing, parks, trails. And we started to frame all that out and say, what would that look like at our church? And so from there, we developed some conceptual plans to be able to take the 17 acres of land in Capitol Heights and use it to benefit and provide community amenities on the site, while also protecting and preserving our environmental heritage in the environment, incorporating practices like food forests, local food production, walking trails, conducting and hosting solar farms or solar as well. And so I think this is just a little bit, or helps to capture a little bit of the work that we've been doing at Gethsemane and how we've been able to really connect people in Capitol Heights with local food, and also thinking about components around community design and environmental justice. And I think that concludes it.
Well, thank you so much. You're doing a lot. This is wonderful to hear about all the stuff that Gethsemane is doing. So now I'm going to transition to Reverend Dr. Michelle Lewis, my cousin, even though, right? So we got the same last name, so we probably are related, right? So let me just say a little bit about Reverend Dr. Michelle Lewis. She's the founder and executive director of the Peace Garden Project, a nonprofit with gardens in New York and North Carolina with the goal of addressing food justice while looking at the intersections of food justice and other justice issues. Her doctoral work focused on food justice and spirituality. Prior to returning home to North Carolina, Michelle pastored a multiracial, multi-ethnic church in New Rochelle, New York, and has pastored churches in Catskills, New York, East Berlin, Connecticut, and the Outer Banks of North Carolina. She also serves as a multi-faith chaplain at Hartford Hospital. Michelle spent time working at the United Nations as an advisor to the Federated States of Micronesia. Am I saying that right? Micronesia. On climate change. I also wanted to mention that she was a United States park ranger. I'm just amazed at all, and has produced 2 award-winning documentaries. I mean, you are just a powerhouse, my sister. So I'm gonna leave it there, and you can let us know the rest.
All right. Thanks so much, Robin. And it's good to be here with you all. Thank you, Ms. Strickford and Dr. Whitlock, for your presentations. And I'm going to, there we go. So the Peace Garden Project, we say that we don't just grow healthy food, we grow healthy communities. And we teach people how to grow food. And so because we believe that, it's fine for us to grow food and give people food, but at the end of the day, we want people to learn how to do this for themselves. The goal is to potentially work myself out of a nonprofit, out of a job, because we've taught enough people how to grow food that we truly are changing food systems across the country and even across the world. So I'll go here. So we started our first gardens were located in New Rochelle, New York, with at actually at New Rochelle United Methodist Church. It's the church um, that I went to kind of just after I was ordained, and they said, we've been thinking about having a garden, and I said, well, that's what I've been studying and researching is how to um, how to set up gardens in communities so that they're real communal spaces. And so our gardens aren't community gardens in a traditional sense because in a traditional community garden, you might go get your own plot, you grow your vegetables, you take your vegetables home, right? And that's that. And so our gardens are all communal spaces. So we have community work days where they're open to the public, where people come out and learn to work the land together because that's how we believe is build community. We don't build community in the silos. In silos, we build community with other people. So those were our first spaces. And what we saw through that first garden is that church had a really difficult relationship with the synagogue that was almost directly across the street from it. And historically, it had not the greatest relationship. But through planting this garden and opening it up for everyone in the community, we actually had people from the synagogue come over and say, this is the first time we felt like the people from this church cared about us. And people from the church said the same thing about people from the synagogue, right? So, but it started in this work of growing food together. And so we don't just grow food, we also rescue food. If you're wondering what this pile is here in this picture on the left, that's a pile of green beans. We have partnerships with, I know, right? We have partnerships with local farmers. And so we'll rescue food, we grow food. And over the last 4 years, actually, not quite 4 years, over the last 3 years, we've distributed more than 250,000 pounds of food into Eastern North Carolina, and that's largely in partnership with farmers and other producers, other agencies and organizations. But we also do grow food, and we'll put food together. So we started out putting kind of food bags together. We would look at what the harvest would be and say, okay, well, we could feed 20 families with this harvest. And then we realized we had to give people recipe cards because sometimes we give people fresh produce and people are like, well, I don't know what to do with this, or what do I do with this? So we include recipe cards so that there's an education component, and actually have classes coming up this fall. We're actually going to teach people how have some hands-on classes and some online classes as well, so that we're teaching people, not just giving them a recipe card and hoping that they get it right. Because if you've ever used a recipe card, it's not too hard to mess things up on those. But we do look at this work because we see environmental justice, racial justice, and community justice. All of these things are linked. We have to look at them as not individual and exclusive. We have to look at these things together, that because there's a real intersectionality to these issues and to our work. And so through doing this, what we found is that we're changing the conversations in communities, and people are beginning to understand, oh, lack of access to food in my community is an issue of environmental justice. And as the environment changes, that's going to impact our food systems, right? So if we don't clean up the environment and do better, right, our food systems are going to be impacted. We'll likely see, where it's projected that we'll see food shortages in the future if nothing changes, and our environment continues on the trajectory that it's on, and we continue, and the harm continues. And so food justice is environmental justice. And we see creating healthy communities as a form of resistance, and growing food and feeding people as a form of resistance. And these are just a couple of our volunteers who volunteer with our gardens. And one of the reasons we partner with churches and other faith-based organizations is because if you took the land holdings, like Ms. Drakeford was talking about, and you put all the land holdings together that faith-based organizations hold, faith-based organizations will be the largest landholder in the country. But most of us know that a lot of these places only mow their grass. There was a church that I pastored years ago that had the largest green space in the community, even larger than the local park. And their property holding was so large, they took up special offerings in the summertime that simply went to mowing the grass. And it's like, you know what if instead of taking up special offerings to mow the grass, right, we were creating these communal spaces like what Ms. Strickford is talking about, and we were creating these spaces where we're growing food, where we're teaching people how to grow food, where we are training up the next generation of young people and leaders. And we work with uh, our partners and the people who are recipients of our produce to determine what to grow, because you could grow a whole bunch of stuff that nobody will eat, right? Or that people will look at and be like, what, I'm not sure I know what that is or that I'm going to like it. And so I'm not going to eat that. And so it's really important to us that in those communities where we're working, where we're helping people set up gardens, that people are thinking about and working with community members, so that we're avoiding toxic charity, right? So that we're not telling people this is what you need, but we're actually working with those community members to determine what the community needs really are. This is one of our volunteers. She loves Swiss chard, and I just think this is the most fun picture. But she comes out, she's an artist, and we run a youth leadership institute. And as a part of our Youth Leadership Institute, in addition to teaching youth advocacy skills and skills related to growing food, they learn financial planning and money management, and they learn how to present themselves in society, and they learn how to work with people. They actually came up with our food distribution model, the young people in our Leadership Institute. When we started, the question from adults is always, what if people steal our vegetables, right? And what I say to that is, if people are stealing vegetables, they're not stealing them to resell them on the black market. People are stealing them because they're embarrassed and they don't know, they don't, either they're ashamed to ask or they're not sure who to ask, so they come and they take. And our young people said, well, if people are hungry, can we just give them food? Right? If we have produce, can we just give them produce? And of course we can. And so that's what we do. We don't make people prove their poverty in order to get produce that we're distributing. If someone shows up and says, I need, we give to them. So these are some of the other youth, some of the produce that we've distributed. And as part of our Youth Leadership Institute, the students have to write and present essays. And this is just a brief snippet. One of the young ladies said, I've actually never been looked up to be a leader, nor have I tried to become one, knowing all the responsibilities and being one. But then she goes on to talk about translating for her family, and how she's often been the person who's had to translate for her parents at the school and for her brothers so that they would understand, and did that from a really young age up until her parents were able to grasp the language enough that they could advocate then for themselves and for their children. And so when we work with communities to help them set up gardens, we'll look at asset mapping and community partnerships and help them to determine where the assets are in their communities and who are those people maybe doing the work or thinking about doing the work that you can partner with, right? So that you don't have to feel like you're recreating the wheel in order to do the work. Like, what's the smartest way to get the work done, and who are the people that you're going to be able to do the work with? So included in our partners are is the juvenile justice system is one of our partners. And so for kids who have gotten in trouble, they'll actually have to come to us to complete community service. So we make those service opportunities available in our gardens for not just young people who are caught up in the system, but for adults as well. And so it's important, as you're thinking of creating a team, to look to teachers and parents. Students from colleges and universities make up our team, as well as middle school and high school students. Our Youth Leadership Institute is open for rising fifth graders through high school graduates. And so they get a comprehensive education in all those things I talked about earlier, but also comprehensive education in environmental justice issues, because North Carolina is the birthplace of the environmental justice movement, with Warren County in 1982. And for those of you who don't know, there's a Black community in Warren County. The decision was made to start trucking in toxic soil that was full of carcinogens, like 60,000 tons. And so people protested, more than 500 people were arrested, and they still trucked in the soil. And, there are reports even last year about more toxic soil just being farmed out to Black communities in North Carolina. And so we're really trying to make sure that everyone understands that it's Black and brown people, it's poor people, it's people that don't know how to advocate for themselves, that have never, people who feel like they lack political power, people who are impoverished. And so we're making sure that young people especially are learning how to advocate for themselves and how to advocate for their communities through our Youth Leadership Institute. So we've had a partnership in the past with a farmer, and I like this picture because this was one of our students from Duke University, one of our interns who came out, and she was like, "I've never fed a chicken or held a chicken. It's actually a lot like holding a cat. If you're not a cat person, you might not want to do it. As long as you hold them so that the feathers don't flap, you can pet the chicken and they purr. But we're really about making sure that we're creating these natural experiences for folks in communities because all of us are connected and we're connected to everything in, we're all so connected, right? And I think it's when we forget that, when we forget the connection that all of us have, not just to each other, but to the natural world, that's when we begin to really see, the pollution increase in our communities. We begin to see, people using more water than they should and not being more careful about the water that they're using. We begin to, when we turn a blind eye to what's going on in other people's communities, we throw something in the trash, forgetting that someone has to take care of that piece of garbage wherever it ends up. And it's often poor people and Black and brown people, not just here in our country, but in countries around the world. So that's what we do at the Peace Garden Project. And yeah, I think I might have gone through that a little fast, but I didn't want to take up too much time. So thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I love it. I made myself a couple of notes. I love the toxic charity that you mentioned. The disconnect with cultural food needs of the community, which happens at a lot of places. And we are responsible to make sure that connection gets made. So we aren't doing toxic charity. I wrote that down. So I'm going to jump into a general question. I'm going to throw it out to all of you, and you can jump in or add to it or what have you. Since we're here to talk about the Black church, how can the Black church leverage their influence and community presence to spread the message of environmental justice and address the effects on the marginalized communities that are dealing with these injustices, including inequities around resource distribution, not just financial, but food and other resources in their community? So just if anyone wants to speak to their thoughts of how the Black church can use their power and their influence.
I will defer and come in last. Let's listen to what my colleagues have to say.
Yeah, I would certainly highlight the role of education. And I don't want to just always say, oh, it's education, right? But I think that in what we've seen at Gethsemane and through the work with the capital market is that some of the resistance that I face is because, one, some people feel, even within the Black community, right, or even within a Black church, there are some people who still feel like that is not my problem, right? So the first thing that I've had to do is find ways to, in order to even get us to the point where we can start to advocate for it, is to help people understand how it's connected to them and how it impacts them, right? So one of the initiatives that we're working on right now with Gethsemane is that affordable housing project, right? So I have seniors at our church who may be in the 80s and 90s, right? They might have been some of the wealthiest people in Prince George's County, right? So they may not necessarily understand what affordable housing means today. And so having to start to break that down for them and really do some education campaigns. And that's where I find it beneficial to bring in more, sometimes this academic and professional side, but also then for me needing and loving to have individuals who are more scripturally sound, right? Who are the theologians, right? Who are able to then take this theoretical framework and then connect it with the spiritual framework that then helps to educate people to see how it connects and impacts them. Right. Practical things that we do are podcasts, right? We talk about it. We request that our pastor preach about it. We get it. It's a young group of us, some of us. And so we get in people's faces. If that means that I'm going to be outside doing a community gardening while y'all are having choir rehearsal and then I come in and I show you what we've been growing to make you come outside, then you see us, and then you feel connected, and you come to the work, and then you start to advocate. So I would say education, and also being consistent in creating spaces where people can show up.
And I'd like to add to that, showing up, and because there are organizations in communities that are doing some of this work, but when you look at who's doing the work in a lot of communities, sometimes you don't always find marginalized people. You don't find Black and Brown people who are showing up to work on some of these projects in communities. And so I would say, if there's an organization in your community to reach out and say, like, maybe we'd like you to come talk to us, back to that education piece that Ms. Drakeford already brought up, or to go out and say, you know what, we don't really know what this is, but we'd like to learn more about it, and maybe participate in a volunteer day. And that's what I like about our model, is that people don't have to overcommit. If somebody wants to show up once, they can show up once. If they want to show up every month, they can show up every month. If they want to show up every Saturday, they can do that as well. So just looking for those opportunities, and then and saying, you know what, it's okay for us to start small. I think sometimes we think we have to start with this huge project that's going to change our community, right? And we've got our deliverables, and we're going to hit our deliverables by this date and this date and this date and this date, right? And it's okay to say, we're going to start small and see how this works, and then we're going to build on that. So I like to encourage folks to, if you're not sure where to start small, to do something, but recognizing that doing something is better than doing nothing.
So I can't add much more than what Dr. Lewis, and I'm going to give you your doctorate in advance, Dr. Drakeford. So I can't add much more. I can say this is that it's normally for the Protestant church, the power is at the pulpit, and the centrality of the church is at the pulpit, and the pastor must preach about it. The pastor must speak about it. The pastor must talk about it, and the pastor must lead it. Now, after he has talked about it and preached about it, then he has to assign it to someone like a Brittany, who's on fire for it. And we've been able to start EJ Ministry in the church. We call it EJ Ministry, Environmental Justice Ministry. And when we did it, now we have a very large church, 50 people came out and said, I want to be a part of this ministry. I thought we'd get 10, but 50 people came out, and not only did they want to do it, but they wanted to raise money. They want to do all kinds of stuff. And then the last thing, and then I go to the next question, is we got to get with Robin Lewis and green the church. We got to get with Robin Lewis and green the church. We got to get with Robin Lewis. You don't have to, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You got an organization that will help lead it. And if we just simply get with Robin, I hope everybody hear me, green the church, and what Robin is doing, it just makes it a lot easier.
Well, thank you for that public service announcement about green the church. But we are trying to bring Black churches together to do this work. So thank you for that, Reverend Dr. Whitlock. So I'm going to jump into a specific question and segue right into a question for you, Reverend Dr. Whitlock. So as senior pastor of Reed Temple AME, you're also the leader of the Environmental Justice Ministry Initiative in the 2nd District of the AME Church. Tell us why the Reed in the 2nd District, how did that all come about? And decided to implement the creation of this wonderful ministry that I'm so happy that we have, and throughout the 2nd District, which is you mentioned over 400 churches. So what was the impetus? What happened? Why did that occur, and how did that come up?
Several things hit us, and certainly our bishop, our what we call presiding elders and pastors, we got together and we started talking about it. One, the challenges that we know nationally, water challenges, deforestation challenges. And just if you were in Maryland, you could smell the smoke coming from Canada. I mean, there were issues that our community faces on a daily basis. And then the public policy debates, are there climate changes Are there not? Is there climate change? And so we wanted to be a part of that. And clearly, when we started working with the University of Maryland, Dr. Wilson, he enlightened us as well about opportunities that are available not only to change and help save the earth, but also for funding. And so if you couple the public policy part, advocacy, and then you couple that with programmatic approaches to save the earth, and then the church sees another stream of income, then it just begins to work together for the good. And that really is it. If I can be completely transparent, we're looking at a solar project right now that will probably net the church in 4 or 5 years close to, I don't know, $2-3 million for a solar project that we don't have to spend a dime on. Again, I mean, there are opportunities that we must take advantage of at the church. I have no problem preaching about making sure your soul is ready for heaven, but we got to take care of the earth, and we got to make sure people are living well. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Oh yes, absolutely. It just culminated. And I guess the bishop tapped you because he knew you were doing stuff at Reed. So it's exciting. It's very exciting. I'm so proud of the second district.
We're proud of you.
Yes, thank you. So the next question I'm gonna direct it to Sister Brittany. Um, so two things. As an organizer with the capital market and co-chair of the trustee board at Gethsemane, I see a lot of stuff that your church is doing in terms of community outreach and social justice ministries. You mentioned earlier about ways in which your church is doing things. So I'm going to jump to another side of you, which is your profession as a professional community planner. I too have a master's in sustainable urban planning that I got from GW, but I'm not a planner in that sense, and you are. So just kind of some examples. Can you share specific examples and provisions that were or are introduced in connecting the community from a planning perspective and the faith community, connecting it all since you see it all?
Yeah. So one of the primary projects that I worked on for my professional career was the update of Prince George's County zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations rewrite. And so for people who don't know, zoning is basically the law that determines what you can build, where you can build it, how you can build it, who needs to be notified when you're building it, and what's the process that you have to go through to navigate that. In Prince George's County, the document, if you include zoning plus the subdivision regulations, hyper technical. At one point, the documents were almost about 1,800 pages, and most often people need an attorney. You have to hire an attorney to help you navigate through the zoning ordinance to figure out what's happening. And so, for the most part, while planning and actual creating community plans and community visions are important, what determines how things are built, right? So what determines where roads are located, how wide a road is, how wide a sidewalk is, if a liquor store can be located in your neighborhood, if the liquor store can be 20,000 square feet, or if the liquor store can be 2 square feet, right? All those things are determined by the zoning ordinance. Even for faith-based institutions, if you, let's say I'm a church, I want to do affordable housing project, it might even zone to do that project. Is that even permissible? Do I need to go through subdivision? So there's all these technical aspects, even like all these technical and legal aspects that are very important and critical to urban planning, that I think many churches, particularly small churches. So my church, our congregation is smaller than 500 people. So we don't necessarily have the liberty or the financial ability to hire many attorneys. So that means that I work with our church and other smaller churches to help them navigate through reading a zoning ordinance so that they can understand what's happening, right? Even things as small as another example, I mentioned that our church abuts or is next to a river. We also have what's called a tree conservation plan, which means you can't just cut down trees or you can't just do certain things just because you want to do it, right? So actually helping people navigate and understand what the law is and how, and once you understand the law, how you're then able to advance and move forward and articulate that. So typically what I say is 4 things. You got to know the turf. So what is the actual lay or the overall community that you're working with? You need to know the players. Who are the people who are responsible for making decisions? You need to know the rules of the game. So what are the code? And then you need to know what you're trying to do and how you're able to then navigate that. So I think for me, the zoning ordinance is going to be one of the most critical things that really impacts what many communities do. And I think from an environmental perspective, and I know Dr. Jacoby Wilson, he writes about this, is like the role of planning and zoning on community design and environmental justice. And if you're able to understand the zoning ordinance, you're able then to advocate and articulate for policies and actual design that can then start to transform your community.
Thank you. Thank you. I am going to transition to Reverend Dr. Michelle Lewis. Um, um, I have so many questions for all of you, but I know we're running short on time, but I'm going to ask as many as I can. So since you've pastored several churches and are still very connected as a faith leader to the church, I kind of want to know what inspired you to start and to start this Peace Garden project, and how does it intersect with the concept of environmental justice? Although you have shared that, but kind of give us some of the flavor. What was the impetus for you to do this and kind of?
So when I was a grad student at Yale, I quit a very real, like, adult life job to go back to school. I was a federal law enforcement officer with the Department of the Interior National Park Service. And I still had a mortgage. My tenant stopped paying rent, actually said to me, well, what are you going to do about it? You're not here. I had an apartment that I was paying rent on. I had a car note. I was working 2 jobs and going to school, and I was just on the struggle bus. And someone said, well, why don't you go to social services and see if you can get food stamps or something? I was like, oh, okay. So I rode my bike to social services, right? Because I'm trying to save gas. And I get to social services, the social worker, caseworker crunches the numbers. And she looks at me and says, you make about $50 too much money to get any help. And so I was like, so do I work less? And she said, no, you'd only qualify for about $20 a month if you work less. And then she suggested I have a baby and said, if you have a baby, you'll qualify for all of these things, and read the list of things to me that I would qualify for if I had a baby. And I was like, oh, okay. I rode my bike home and called my parents and asked my parents for money, which they gave me. But I had a safety net. And so many people don't have a safety net. And I realized that some of the kids I was working with that summer, doing my summer research, they didn't have a safety net, right? They were food insecure. And I was like, well, I don't know, maybe we can buy some seeds and try to figure out how to grow food. And so that's when I started growing food. And so I joke now, I'm like, yeah, I did have a baby that year. It was called the Peace Garden Project. So, because that's when the idea started. And it took it some years to get to a place. That was back in 2010. I was actually going through files the other day and found the letter from social services that they sent me about, me not qualifying for benefits. And so, yeah, that was back in 2010. The first gardens didn't get going until 2016. But since that time now, as I've talked to women all over the country, I've heard that story from other women. They were like, you know what? I went to social services and tried to get help, and I was told to have a baby because I didn't qualify for any assistance. And so, and these have been white women, they've been Black women, right? And so I'm like, we've got to change the conversation. And through growing food and learning how to grow food and teaching people how to grow food, we're able to change these systems, because these systems are oppressive systems, right? And so we're able to change these systems. And so when I look at food justice as environmental justice, right? Because as we're growing food, we can plant crops that nourish the soil and that nourish the earth, right? That actually are giving something back instead of taking it all away. And so it's another way to give back to the earth, but also to work on these systemic justice issues that are present in all of our communities.
Well, thank you. Thank you. That's
I'm
such a powerful story. Go ahead.
I'm
Doc.
appalled that someone would suggest that you should have a child.
Maybe. Yeah. Like
That
that's gonna make
I'm
it better, right? Yeah. I
This
still
was go ahead. Go
no,
ahead.
I still like my mind is boggled. I remember riding my bike home that day thinking, like, this can't be, and this lady didn't know me from Adam, right? I mean, she didn't know. I don't recall talking to her, about me being a student and, what my life goals were, what my past was, any of the things that I'd accomplished. Her quick and easy answer was, and it's not a quick answer, right? Because you gotta get and be pregnant. Um, was to have a baby. And yeah,
Hmm.
other women have told me the same thing. I've heard it enough times now that I know it's something that's regularly said to women who are seeking assistance um, when they need help.
Well,
Yeah, that is. I won't say amazing in a positive way. That's oppressive. And additionally, I mean, personally, my dad, he was in his 90s, and when he to get some food help, they gave him $16 of
Mhm.
food stamps, and they said that's what you get because you're right over the threshold of getting anything else. And he was in his late 80s, 90s. So the way the system is currently designed, it is very oppressive for people who are in need.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that story because that really does hit home. Um, so I'm gonna switch back to you, Reverend Dr. Whitlock, and just kind of ask you, in your thoughts and opinions, what are some of the unique challenges that you see the Black community faces? You can speak to in general. You can speak to the county, Prince George's County, or wherever you think, in terms of environmental justice or injustice, and things that are going on that are impacting the Black community negatively. And how do you think that the AME Church can help the community address some of those needs around in the second district or just Reed Temple. What do you think?
so I immediately thought about Reverend Dr. Michelle Lewis and this challenge of food deserts that exist in historically Black communities. And when you go to white communities, you don't have the same challenges. But when you go to a Black community, you'll find Burger King, McDonald's, Taco Bell, Cane's, every fast food imaginable, right? And then you'll start thinking that's the kind of food we need to eat. And no, it's a horrible thing. And so food deserts for me are a real issue, not just in Prince George's County, but in African American communities throughout the country. Number two, gun violence. If we don't deal with gun violence as an environmental justice issue, I think we're missing a big piece because you don't feel comfortable walking the streets. You don't feel comfortable going to school. You just don't feel comfortable where you live, work, and worship when you have more guns on the street than you do have the opportunity for a job. Go get a decent meal, go find a place to buy food, just go to work. And I love what Brittany talked about the amount, I think it was either Brittany or Michelle that talked about the amount of land that the African American community, it was Michelle, that the amount of land that the African American church owns. And right now, what's happening nationwide, which is appalling, we have white developers or these large companies coming in to buy the land. And I know we deal with gentrification, I got that. But gentrification doesn't necessarily mean you got to give away your land. And you can still rent your land just like that person coming in to buy your land. But yet and still, we're finding that leadership of churches are selling their land. Why? Because even before COVID, churches were emptying out. I mean, we knew millennials had no interest. At least 50 to 60% of millennials had no interest in going to church, and we knew Gen X were beginning to lose interest in church. I mean, when you deal with the GI generation, they are in church. They're there. They're there. The baby boomers are there, but Gen X and millennials and Z and no, they're not there. So the church, as one of my colleagues, the Black church is dead based on just population alone. So I think the church needs to wake up and look at different opportunities, different streams of income, different ministry. I'm not hating on civil rights. I'm not hating on that. But if we don't begin to take a look at a whole genre, a whole new opportunity for us to do ministry in the 21st century, which is different than we did in 19th and 20th century, I think we're going to be out. I think we're going to be out. I just don't think the church is what it used to be. It's not your grandmama's church. It really isn't your parents' church anymore. And post-pandemic, we have to begin to take a look at doing church altogether differently.
Can I just jump into?
Yes, I was going to say, just jump on in, y'all.
And so what I've found, and so, you know, from my academic research, from how like the philosophy that I use to do our church work, you know, I'm 36 years old. I serve as a trustee, as a chair of the trustee board of a church that, you know, the majority of congregation is 65 years or older, right? So I'm already like a little bit of an anomaly on the trustee board. And, you know, we're responsible for the buildings and grounds. And what I have found, right, or at least in the research, or how I've tried to articulate this, is that when I look at like the historic old one-room church building that my great-great-great-grandfather attended and that they helped construct and build, that church wasn't just a worship center that was only used on Sundays from 10 to 2, right? It was a building where they had church, they had school, right? It served as the catalyst for like the Ridgely Rosenwald School. They use it as a catalyst for farmers markets, for all other types of things that were happening in the community. And so what I often charge the people at my church is to say, me saying that I want to do, you know, transition our kitchen into a commercial kitchen incubator, because we already partner with 25 farmers on a regular basis every week, and having our kitchen being used from, you know, Monday through Sunday now, instead of just leaving it vacant. Me saying that isn't me saying that and saying that this has never happened before. It's a very clear precedence that when formerly enslaved people were establishing their own institutions, these are the ways in which they used the resources and they stewarded the resources that they had to make sure that they were sustainable and available for generations to come. And I think even in the conversation around environmental justice, we talk about the sustainability and the generationality of the earth, right? But it's also important that it's also included in like the future of the young people, right? Like, who are the people who we expect to have to hold space for this church, right? To hold space for this religion, to hold space for the values and traditions that we hold sacred. And so I often say, well, like, if we're not trying to protect the environment, right, at least we can try to create a church that is available for people in the future. So I just wanted to add that, Reverend Whitlock, about this idea that like the church not being the same, but we have very clear precedents for Black people as how the church has been used to support environmental justice issues, to support issues around education, to support issues around food access, to support issues around economic development and economic prosperity. And how do we remind people that that is where like the Black church has always been rooted in? Like, yes, it's civil rights, and yes, civil rights are not constrained to this one aspect of our identity and who we are. So I just wanted to toss that out there.
And I'm not going to try to cut you off, Dr. Lewis. I'm going to give 2 seconds. What Eddie Glaude said out of Princeton, he said that the Black church is dead. He wrote the article, I think, 10 years ago, and it used to be the repository for Black information in the community. But when we moved away to a prosperity ministry and preachers started driving Roses and wearing designer clothes and living in Chevy Chase versus even Prince George's County, then we find ourselves not interested, or the church, because of leadership, not interested in even civil rights, community development, economic development, EJ, let alone women's rights. I mean, so I think the church has shifted, particularly the Black church, from what it has been in the past.
Thank you for that clarity. I really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Reverend Dr. Lewis, did you want to add to that?
I mean, I think they've said it well. Did you have another question?
I do. Okay. I have tons. But I love the fact that we're talking about, you know, the Black church having roots, but yet also being progressive and thinking about how the new audiences and the next generation is receives information, and
Right.
it's not necessarily the same as the way we did before. Now, even my son, who's a millennial, he loves the online church. I mean, he comes and he's interested, and he talks to his friends now about what he's learning in church. And I'm so proud that I don't care how he gets it. That's the way he gets it. Podcast, online, come into the building, but we've got to also change as leaders in the faith community, and accept that some people receive information different. And, in order for us to maintain the church, we have to grow in our way of communicating as well. So I love that. I love that conversation that you all had.
Well, and the church can't be afraid to change, right? And I think that's what both Dr. Whitlock and Ms. Drakeford are getting at, is that the church has got to be able to change and shift and grow and see the patterns of what's happening in communities on the ground, with our natural and our built environments, and say, you know what, like, we can't be left behind in this, because the Black church historically, and it's already been said, has been the leader in social justice issues and movements. And but it's, people are losing trust in the church and for the church because of what we've seen, with some of the leadership in our churches, and that's unfortunate, but it's true. But I think that when we look at the environmental justice movement, there's definitely room for the Black church and for all our churches to be more involved, to do the work, and not to use, because there are some churches that'll use some of the language in the Bible is for why they don't have to be involved in environmental justice. And so I think that as we reframe the conversation in the narrative, we have to show why scripture says these are reasons that we're called to be involved in the environmental justice movement, because it really is about loving our neighbors.
Yeah, thank you. Did you want to add to that, anyone?
The church used to change culture. Now it's trying to just catch up with culture.
Yeah.
And that's kind of scary for me as a pastor. And I did not get into church to be co-opted or to become a thermometer. We got to be the thermostat. If we're not doing that, then we're not doing the real work of God in Jesus Christ.
Amen. So Reverend Dr. Michelle Lewis, I know we're short on time, but I wanted to give you the last question since we got into a conversation. And, I know you've pastored several churches and you've done a whole bunch of things, but could you, as a faith leader, what message or advice would you give to other faith community leaders, individuals, organizations looking to start similar initiatives focused on environmental justice and food access? What advice would you give to us?
I would say don't wait. If you have an idea, take it, see who's interested in the idea, and run with it. One of the things that's coming up for us in November is the first annual Outer Banks Environmental Film Festival. And when we started working on it, we were like, are people going to be into this? And we were, oh my gosh, people are very into it. And it's exciting, right? And so not to be afraid to try something new, but also not to be afraid to fail, right? Because it's often through those failures that we learn the most. I mean, the first garden we attempted to set up, the church wouldn't do it because they were worried about how the property would look. But learned a lot from that failure. And since then, have set up far more gardens. And if I would have let that one failure stop me, we wouldn't have an organization that's thriving now at this stage. So I would just say, don't be afraid to fail and don't be afraid to try something new.
Thank you. That's wonderful advice. We have about 2 minutes, and there is a question in the chat that I'm gonna take. It was actually addressed to you, Sister Brittany, about it popped up. There you go. Do you have any suggestions to increase accessibility in navigating our zoning ordinance for EJ workers who can't hire specialized help?
Yeah, so 2 things. One, the Prince George's County Planning Department is rolling out soon, I think they may have started, I'm not certain, a neighborhood planning academy, which is a community-based planning academy to teach residents about planning. It's a limited, small capacity, so that would be one opportunity. Second, the Capital Market is planning, and we're developing our own community planning academy to teach residents about urban planning, zoning, environmental justice, and stewardship, and how they can work on that. So just stay tuned, follow the Capital Market on Instagram, and we'll have more information around our community-based training program to teach people about community development and community planning.
Well, thank you all. You are awesome. We have like 30 seconds. No, we don't. I thought we had a couple of seconds, but just wanted to say thank you all. You're awesome, just powerhouses. I'm so proud to have been on this panel with you. So thank you very much. And thank you all for listening. And take care. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.